Welcome to Talking Heads on USA Global TV, starring the one and only wonderful Dr. Jacqueline. It's a prestigious place where world-class influencers and experts meet, and where you'll find the most trusted advisors and coaches for all things in life and business. Visit usaglobaltv.com to sign up for our newsletter, get the value you need, and be first in line to learn about events and giveaways and other valuable content. Connect with us. Email Dr. Jacqueline at usaglobaltv.com to talk about how you can become part of USA Global TV. That's USA Global TV, where the doctor is always in.
Hello, welcome to USA Global TV and Radio. My name is Caroline Heward, and I'm known as the Harley Street Stress Expert. Our show today is Talking Heads. I'm an expert presenter on today's topic, which is healing the body through trauma. How does trauma affect our lives and what we can do about it? And this is part of a mind and body connection. Let's begin. So trauma, we hear that word a lot, trauma. And it also is coupled with other words such as abuse, fear, post-traumatic stress disorder, known as PTSD, or a terrifying event. Sometimes we hear things like nightmares. So people are getting nightmares, they're not sleeping, and they're talking in their sleep. It can be associated with a terrifying event that's happened in your life. You can feel at times a victim. Some people talk about flashbacks, or they feel jumpy around different circumstances and events, people, sensory experiences, and they're usually hypervigilant. This also affects our mental health. So trauma is a myriad of things that we associate with the word trauma. And essentially, trauma is when there's something that's not right, there's something that's that we're behaving in a way that's not, in inverted commas, normal. So we're in a hypervigilant way, and we're like sort of over-expressing something or over-nervous. It can affect us in terms of our being on edge, or having an impatience or irritability. So trauma can affect us in all sorts of ways. So there's not just one type of trauma. There's a myriad of different types of trauma that can be called trauma. So it can be a small trauma, or it can be a very deep trauma. But the word trauma is when the body stops functioning the way it should do, and it goes into what we might call a hyperdrive and an insecurity around circumstances, people, and events. So let's look at some life experiences that might create trauma. So if there's a relationship breakdown, an intimate relationship or a friendship, where they're still alive, so there's been no grieving process, that can have an effect on the body, on the mind, where we'll be hypervigilant and feeling moving into a case of lack of trust in our relationships and our friendships. So when a relationship breaks down through things like infidelity, then there will be a complete lack of trust in that relationship and in future relationships, because the memory of that breakdown is stored in our memory matrix of the body. And so the memory brings up all the insecurities of what happened previously. So we're not then in a space of being with that person and in that experience. We're being in a space of the past experiences and playing them out as if it's happening again with that person. And that might be a different name, a different person, a different time, a different situation. But we will bring up the memory, and we will start reliving the memory of that breakdown, that trauma that happened. It can be a major life change, such as a move from countries, towns, cities. It can be a change of career. It can be a home move even for some people. Certainly in today's world, there is a lot of people that are displaced, not in their country of origin, through war, through civil war, through all sorts of rationale that it's not safe to stay in that country. And so that can have an effect, because that affects our root chakra, and that affects our stability, our foundation, and our security, which can have a traumatic effect. Bereavement issues, this also has an effect on the root chakra. And when there is a major bereavement, such as a parent or somebody very close to us, such as a very dear friend or a mentor that we're very close to, this can have a big effect. And it can affect you emotionally, physically, in the body, and it can also affect you mentally as well. If there's a loss of job, that will affect your security and your foundation in terms of your money, your security in terms of how you pay for things, and a loss of identity. And that can be very traumatic for many people, because many people that go into retirement, they can be very high performing in their normal day job, and then when they go into retirement, everything goes, and it can be traumatic for them to lose the identity of the type of work that they were doing, because lots of us associate what we do in terms of our work or occupation with who we are. And when we lose our job, our occupation, and the way that we were showing up in the world in terms of our work, it can have a major impact on the way that we experience life and the way we feel about ourselves in the world. Violence, whether it be physical abuse, whether it be emotional abuse, whether it be an attack, a rape, it doesn't matter what it is. Violence can occur in many, many different ways. And if we don't handle it in that time of the experience, it can have a traumatic effect in the body, because the body remembers the trauma. Unless we deal with it, unless we handle it, the body remembers the trauma in the memory of the energy body. And so we then respond in future experiences from that place of the violence, whether it be physical, emotional, mental. So let's look at the mind. The mind is controlling our ship for a lot of us. And trauma resides in the mind. It's the memory. And when we remember, the memories that come up, they're sensory memories. And what happens is we can actually lock ourselves into the trauma of what might have happened 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 30 years ago, 40 years ago, even 50 years ago, depending on our age. Whatever happened, it lives in our memory, and it lives in the mind. And I often say to clients that they are locked in their own prison cell, and you have the key. But we don't remember that. We don't realize that. We have the key to that jail cell, and you can escape into the other aspect of the trauma, and you can release yourself from the trauma by opening the jail cell, because you have the key. You're the one that's locked yourself in that prison cell. And whatever happened in terms of creating the trauma, if it was somebody that had violated you, that person isn't living through that, you are. So it's like they are in that experience with you, in the violence and the attacking and the experience with you every time you go into a response and a reaction. So it's important to remember that that's not who you are and where you are right now. And sometimes with traumas that have happened, like a violent trauma or a childhood living in an abusive family or war, when you're in a different space, the mind locks you into the space of the trauma and keeps reminding you. So you relive it on a daily basis or on a regular basis, which literally keeps you locked in a space where it's not necessary. And when you are in awareness of that, when you know you have the key and you can escape, this is the key to moving forward. It's important to recognize, to observe, to be witness to that trauma and to handle the feelings and emotions. But what happens is we don't handle the feelings and emotions because they're just too difficult. And when it becomes difficult, what we do in that space of the trauma is we literally shut down the feelings and emotions as a protection mechanism. Nobody thinks about it. We don't decide. The body protects you. And when it shuts down the feelings and emotions, then the escape route is the mind. And then you think and analyze and talk through everything, including your trauma. So the trauma then relives itself every day in the mind. And you can free yourself from this mind trauma. Our thoughts create our experiences. And when you are thinking about something, the mind then starts to make it your reality in terms of your sensory experiences. So let's look at the limbic system. The limbic system is the system in the brain that creates these situations for the good and the bad. So the hypothalamus is responsible for the endocrine system. The endocrine system is related to the 7 major glands. So each of the major glands is related to each of the 7 chakras. And this is responsible for our homeostasis, our balance in each of those glands, and so that everything responds appropriately and accordingly, so that it's comfortable. It's not in a state of dis-ease. The amygdala is the emotional stimuli. This is where if we smell something, if we hear something, if we taste something, if we see something, this is where that can go into overdrive. So the amygdala is very important. Our normal emotional stimuli in the root chakra, in the chakra system, each of the sensories are related to each of the glands of the body. And so when we might experience something, it will create a memory, which the hippocampus is responsible for our memories. Sometimes we have good memories, and sometimes we have challenging memories or traumatic memories. And the body will start to respond as if you are still in the experience of that memory. So the amygdala is the emotional stimuli, and the thalamus is the sensory stimuli. So this is where, if we smell something, if we hear something, we're going to be affected. So the limbic system, if we understand how it works, then we can then take a breath and take a space to pause, because whatever we think about creates. Thoughts become things, and whatever thoughts come up, they fire together and they wire together. And so if we're thinking, and if we bring up that traumatic event and we start to experience it, whatever fires together wires together, and it creates a whole movement of you moving back into that trauma experience. So this is important to keep the limbic system healthy by taking a pause. Rather than responding and reacting, taking a breath, reflecting, because this is where we will respond instantly. So reflect, making sure that you are safe, because you're always safe. You are the person that has the key to that jail, and you are always safe in the limbic system. The limbic system is prehistoric. It responds as if there's a saber-toothed tiger. If there's a saber-toothed tiger that's around the corner and you can see it and you can hear it roaring, you will step into that state of a high emotional fight or flight. And if that happens, then you will feel uncomfortable and you will step into that traumatic experience and the whole body goes into overdrive. Now, there is no saber-toothed tiger, but the limbic system starts to respond as if there is. So the 3 types of trauma. The first one is an acute trauma, which is related to one single event, one single experience. So it could be a move, a home move that was challenging and difficult. It could be a breakdown in a relationship. It could be one bereavement. So it's one single event that creates the trauma. Chronic trauma is where there's long term. So it goes on for a long time. So it could be something like domestic abuse, violence, continual attacks, bullying, many situations that go on and on in terms of relationships. It could be something that affects you in terms of your work, being bullied in your workplace. So it's essentially something that goes on, and it could be that you're still in it, you're still in the experience of the trauma and having to handle it on a daily basis. And the final type is the complex type of trauma, which is multiple. So there are many different things. So it could be when you were a child, there was childhood abuse. It could be that then you move into a friendship that is abusive, a relationship that becomes abusive. You could be the victim of a crime. And so it will be that there's lots of different things that create that multiple effect of the experience of trauma. Now, when you are experiencing this type of trauma, you will have this experience internally of feeling the victim, of being the victim. And so the situations will be many and a myriad where you will feel that you're in that space of being the victim, whatever you're doing. And so you will hold your body in a different way, almost like a protective way. You will almost fear something happening. And so the body and the energy of the body is preparing for that experience. Now, everything is frequency and everything is energy. And so if we're holding ourselves in the space of victim, we will then attract things to go wrong in that victim space. So as you can start to hear, this is a self-fulfilling prophecy. And you will constantly create situations that will cause you trauma. So trauma responses, the 4 P's of trauma. So fight. Let's look at the first one. When you're fighting your way through the trauma, this will appear in your everyday life, maybe as bullying somebody else. You may feel aggressive to everything that you're experiencing in life, to people, to things, to experiences. It might be that you demand perfection of yourself initially and obviously of others. It might be that you become much more assertive to fight your way through. In your daily activities, this isn't about only the specific trauma. This is in your daily activities after the trauma, and this will be affecting you in terms of how you experience life with yourself and with others. I've often said to some people that I've spoken to, especially when I see that fight in them, I say I could see them fighting their way out of a paper bag, which generally gets a laugh because it's familiar, that fighting the way out of a paper bag. And that fight will feel when you wake up in the morning, another fight, another battle. It will almost feel like you're putting your suit of armour on and fighting your way through whatever occurs in your life. It will create you to be impulsive, to move through in terms of your daily activities. So you'll make decisions quickly, but you'll still be looking for perfection. Flight. This is where you will literally run away, and you will run from all sorts of things in your daily life. So it's literally where you take flight. This will affect you in your daily life in ways of avoidance. This is where you will avoid being with people, avoid situations, avoid social situations. It might be that you might spend lots of days being on your own. It might be that you spend time, or you'll have strategies that will give you the activities of finding your own space and withdrawing from work, from friends, from social, from situations that would be normal in an everyday life. That this is where you will take flight and avoid situations. This could lead to depression, and because of the social lack of interaction. Freeze. When you freeze, this will create a depression. This will bring you a disassociation with the experience of your everyday life. This is where you'll be experiencing something but not experiencing it. I call it autopilot. So you're in the experience but not of the experience. It's kind of happening on a screen rather than you being in the experience. This will create brain fog, and it will also lead to you avoiding human contact. This can be challenging in your everyday life because when you freeze, it will create a situation of being in a hyper state of anxiety and depression. Fawning is people pleasing. It's where you will think of the other person first, that everything is about the other person, that you're not thinking about yourself. And so boundaries will be really difficult, and that everybody will be stepping over your boundaries, your time, your space, your work, your personal life. It'll be everybody else is important, but you're not. So this will be challenging for you in terms of making decisions and moving forward, because it's everybody else first. And that will create some difficulties in your life because you will feel upset, frustrated, even angry sometimes that there is no you in your life. The identity will fall because fawning is about pleasing everyone else. So you don't step into that state of trauma with anyone. So you'll be over endorsing the fact that everyone else is important. So when the emotions shut down, in relationships, this will create a situation where you will become dysfunctional in that relationship. And when we become dysfunctional, then we might run into our cave. We might be hiding from the relationship, needing space. We might not feel happy in that relationship that we're in, whether it's a family relationship, a friendship, or whether it's an intimate relationship. Because we're operating from the mind. And when you're operating from the mind, there will be a disassociation with the body. It will almost feel like the body will feel cut off, like you're only operating from the neck down. You're operating from the neck up, and then you don't feel anything from the neck down. And this can create some awful experiences because it will move you, some people, into strategies of overly working to escape the relationships that don't work. It will lead to a dysfunctional relationship in terms of the emotional side of things. So when you go in your working situation, everything is wonderful because you'll be that performer. But when you move into your family situations, into your personal life, then it doesn't work, and it becomes challenging not only for you but everybody around you. Because when the emotions are shut down, you're in the mind and in the space of dealing with the trauma on a daily basis by being disassociated. Where everybody else will be running around in their emotions, what you will do is you will try and solve what's not working. It can obviously affect your intimacy, because if you don't feel a sensory of pleasure in any aspect of your life, then you will feel out of touch with the experiences of pleasure within your intimate relationship, as well as any other aspect of the emotions. So if you're cooking, shopping, walking the dog, watching a movie, if you're eating, even if you're in a call, there will be a lack of interconnection with the emotions and feelings. And so everything will be done from the mind. This will move you into a place of being on autopilot, going through the motions without the emotion. And this is all about protection. All of these things are a protection mechanism so that you are able to cope for a future trauma that might appear. This, for some people, can make you highly functional. This will be on overdrive. So you will be almost overactive in the logical states of experiences in your life. So work, you'll be highly functional in times of crisis because you won't be in the emotional space. And when you're highly functional, you can be very intellectual, you can be a super performer in your work, in your occupation. Your diary is filled, there'll be events, appointments. The diary will be very, very full with highly functional activities. And there'll be little space for you being you in that moment of the emotional experiences in your life. So this is good in some aspects, very good in terms of your work, but it can be extremely dysfunctional in terms of your relationships, your family, your friends, so the personal side of your life. So trauma triggers, so sensory experiences can trigger a trauma. A trigger is something that we experience of a time that we're in, a present time, it can be with a person, it can be feelings, it can be some words that are said, a phrase, it can be thoughts, situations, places, the media. If you're watching a movie that almost depicts an experience that you have experienced as a trauma, it can move you into that trigger of handling the trauma again. So sensory is smell, sounds, visual, so what you see, hear. And these triggers, it will make no sense. They're not rational for the moment that you're in. If you're in that sensory present moment, it'll be something that triggers you, that brings you back to that experience. I did have a client inquiry once that had an experience of something that happened in his childhood, an abusive childhood. And he had a very difficult experience in terms of his adulthood, handling, working, being with children. So he decided to overcome this childhood trauma by working with children so that he could help them. That every time he came across certain types of children that had been abused, it brought everything up. So it was a reminder of his situation as a child that was clearly a trigger and undealt with. So let's look at how trauma occurs. Trauma is a behaviour. It's not what we think, it's how we're behaving. And it starts with you as the individual. So it starts with you. And it starts with a thought. So you might be thinking, because you've watched a movie, because somebody has reminded you a memory. So it begins with a thought. And then it moves around, that thought moves around to a feeling. So if you're frightened of, if you've been stung by a bee, for instance, or you've been attacked by a spider and been poisoned by a spider, or if you've been attacked viciously, the thought starts, and then internally it brings about a feeling. And that feeling, it becomes intense. So the thought isn't real because it's in the mind. And because the thought is in the mind, it then creates into a feeling. And then it creates our response, our behaviour. And it becomes a self-perpetuating circle. And we are in the middle of that circle because it starts with our core belief. What we believe, if you break down belief, it's be-lie. And when we are in a be-lie, we become the behaviour of that lie, because the thought isn't real. It becomes real when we move into this cycle. Because when we move in from thoughts, which create feelings, we start to respond as if we are still in that situation, way back whenever that situation was. And we relive in our mind that experience, or we believe that that person that we're connected with, that we're speaking to, that we're in that relationship with, it will happen again. Now, whatever we think, we can create. Whether it's good things or bad things, we can create those experiences. If you have been mugged once and we think that we're going to be mugged again, we can create that experience of being mugged again by our frequency, because like attracts like frequency. There was a study done in a charity that was dealing with domestic abuse, and they invited 50 women. One of them was serially abused, and they invited 50 men. One of them was a serial abuser, to a cocktail party. So there was 100 people in the room. How long do you think that it took these two people to meet? Well, my first question is, do you think they met the serial abused person and the person that perpetrated out of 100 people? The answer is yes, they did meet. It took 10 minutes for them to meet. And 100 people, and that's because of frequency. Whatever frequency that we're vibrating at, we will attract that experience. And so if we're very optimistic and if we're very lively, we will attract very optimistic and lively experiences. Even if we don't voice our thoughts, the thoughts become real, because whatever we're thinking becomes our reality, whether it's in the present moment, whether it's in the past, whether it's in the future, whether it's just for ourselves or with others. We can recreate that traumatic experience every time we think about that experience. So my invitation to you is to manage what you think, to manage how you express. Because if you're thinking negative things are going to happen, have a guess what? They start to happen. So it's not just about thinking, it starts there. But when we manage what we think, we can manage our feelings and emotions, and we can manage our responses. If we think someone is going to create a situation of where we don't trust them, then we can create those situations by believing, that might happen. So the invitation is to stop, take a breath. Whatever fires together, wires together. If you're thinking negatively that something bad is going to happen, then something bad will happen, no matter how long ago the trauma was. So my invitation is for you to be your best you and to feel the best that you can be in the situations, and to move yourself by breathing into the heart so that you experience better things in life and better things in that present moment that you're in. You can stop the effect of the trauma in the moment that you're in by moving into the sensory of the present moment. What do you see? What do you hear? What do you smell? What do you taste? What do you feel? And the feel is not, I feel sad, I feel lonely. The sensory feel is a feeling of, how does the sun feel in my hair? How does the wind feel on my face? How does the water feel in the shower on my back? That sensory feel. And when we're in that place of trauma, the sensory of the moment that we're in disappears, because we're in the sensory, in inverted commas, of the mind and of the trauma, and can relive the trauma moment by moment when it's not even real in that moment. This has been a fairly heavy subject, and one that is very dear to me in terms of helping a lot of people that come from war-torn countries that have civil unrest. And so it's important for me to leave you with things that will help you move forward, so that you know that you don't have to relive this trauma moment by moment. Breathe down into the belly, and that takes you out of the mind and out of the trauma of the experience that the mind is creating. Thank you for your attention. Please subscribe to our YouTube channel, which is USA Global TV and Radio. You can find all of our Talking Heads episodes under the playlist titled Talking Heads 2022. You can find my collections under my name, Caroline Heward, Talking Heads 2022. I offer a free consultation via Zoom or on Skype, or if you would like, what you prefer, over the telephone. So you can reach me on my email address, nomorestress@live.co.uk. My number, +44 if you're international. If it's local, 07523 120 189. Please reach out. I offer a free consultation which will help you relax and feel calm and more peaceful, and it will give you an incredible night's sleep. Thank you for your attention. Please reach out. if I may be of service to you. Thank you. I look forward to seeing you next week.